and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani has arrived in Saudi Arabia to attend the GCC summit today. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman received Qatari Emir Sheikh Thani at airport. Qatari state media said a formal agreement to end a dispute between Riyadh-led coalition and Doha is expected in the summit. This comes after both sides agreed to open airspace and land and sea borders in a major breakthrough in their three-year-old rift. The second round of peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban is starting today in Qatar's capital of Doha. The presidential spokesman said an immediate reduction in violence and a ceasefire are the top priorities of the negotiations. The talks are set to begin after 3 weeks of break. Kashmiris across the world are observing the Right to Self-Determination Day. Prime Minister Imran Khan says Pakistan stands unequivocally with the Kashmiris in their struggle for freedom. On Twitter, Khan called Indian tyranny in Kashmir one of the most ruthless, inhuman and illegal occupations in modern history. The United Nations had adopted a resolution on January 5, 1949 that pledged a free and impartial plebiscite. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden and outgoing President Donald Trump have held rallies in Georgia ahead of Senate runoffs today. Speaking in Atlanta, Biden said the election's result could chart the course not just for the 4 years, but for the next generation. In Dalton, Trump warned that the Georgia runoff is the last line of defense against Democratic control of the Senate. Meanwhile, Georgia's top elections official, Brad Raffensperger, debunked Trump's accusations of widespread voter fraud. The UK has announced its third national lockdown as the new strand of COVID-19 takes the country by storm. The lockdown, likely to last till mid-February, was imposed after over 50,000 cases were detected for 3 straight days. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported over 1,900 cases and 59 deaths overnight as the nation tops 10,400. Globally, there are more than 1.8 million fatalities and 85 million infections. Pakistan are batting at 8 for losing a wicket at the stumps of third day in the final test against New Zealand. The visitors trailed New Zealand by 354 runs after the Kiwis declared their first innings, amassing 659 runs for the loss of 6 wickets. New Zealand skipper Kane Williamson played a stellar innings of 238 runs. The hosts lead the 2-match test series 1-0. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now the news in detail. Qatar's ruler Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani is heading to Saudi Arabia to attend the GCC summit today. This comes after Riyadh and Doha agreed to open airspace and land and sea borders in a breakthrough in their 3-year-old rift. The Gulf states severed ties and imposed a blockade on Qatar in 2017 over accusations of supporting terrorism and an alliance with Iran. Kuwait, which had been mediating throughout the dispute, was first to announce a diplomatic breakthrough. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump's advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, also visited Riyadh and Doha recently in a final push by the administration to resolve the dispute. The lifting of the embargo by Saudi Arabia paves the way for Qatar's ruler to attend an annual summit of Gulf leaders. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says Qatar's attendance will make the 41st summit comprehensive and inclusive. He said the summit will lead member states to reunification and reinforce the path toward prosperity and solidarity in the face of challenges in the Middle East. In a tweet, UAE Foreign Minister Anwar Gargash said the GCC summit will restore cohesion. Meanwhile, Pakistan has also welcomed the much-sought rapprochement between Doha and Riyadh. The Foreign Office says Islamabad lauds the positive role played by the Emir of Kuwait towards the resolution of the differences between the Gulf countries. For more on this, we are joined by James Dorsey, an international analyst from Singapore. Sir, thank you for joining us. Sir, Qatar's ruler Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani is attending the GCC summit in Saudi Arabia after a major breakthrough in their three-year-old rift. Do you see a formal agreement towards ending the dispute permanently during the summit?
Well, I think that at least you are going to see an agreement under which the Saudis open their air, land, and sea borders in return for certain Qatari moves. Most probably that would entail that Qatar withdraws any compensation or damage claims it may have as a result of the boycott. And there may be a sort of undefined clause that about not undermining each other's national security. What the agreement will not do is solve the underlying differences that led to the boycott in the first place. It de facto really means that the Saudis are conceding that they're not going to get the Qataris to comply with those demands. And the Qataris obviously are paying a very small price for having demonstrated that they are perfectly capable of surviving a boycott like this.
Mr. Dorsey, Kuwait was the first to announce a diplomatic breakthrough, while U.S. President Donald Trump's advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, also visited Riyadh and Doha recently. Did both the countries aid this thaw in tensions between Doha and Riyadh?
First of all, I'm not sure how important the role was of Jared Kushner in actually negotiating the agreement. I think that the Saudis had a vested interest in making a move that would win them some brownie points with the incoming Biden administration. They were also happy to give a success to President Trump, the outgoing president, given all the support that he has provided to the Saudis over the last 4 years. For the Qataris, their position has always been, we're willing to negotiate at any given point if and when the boycott is lifted. Now, the opening of the borders may not amount to a full lifting of the boycott, but de facto the boycott becomes meaningless if those borders are open.
Can Doha change its policies towards Iran after lifting of a naval, air and land blockade on Qatar by Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think, first of all, there is no indication whatsoever that Qatar is willing to comply with any of the 13 demands. There are different perceptions of what Iran's relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Iran is. Fact of the matter is that Qatar is a country that is sandwiched between two behemoths in the Gulf, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Qatar shares the world's largest gas field with Iran. So it has an intrinsic need to deal with Iran. And if you look at trade, for example, Qatari trade with Iran is far less than, for example, the volume of trade between Iran and the United Arab Emirates. So I don't see any substantial move on the Qatari part as far as Iran is concerned.
Mr. James Dorsey, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. And now moving on to the second round of peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban is starting today in Qatar's capital of Doha. The talks are set to begin after 3 weeks of break. The presidential spokesman said an immediate reduction in violence and a ceasefire are the top priorities of the negotiations. U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said the current levels of violence in Afghanistan are unacceptable. Meanwhile, Kabul claimed to kill at least 38 Taliban fighters during an operation in the Kandahar province. In a tweet, the Ministry of Defense said the fighters were planning to attack the positions of Afghan security forces, while a Taliban spokesperson said 2 soldiers were killed during their attack on a checkpost in the Ghazni province. Kashmiris across the world are observing the Right to Self-Determination Day. The United Nations had adopted a resolution on January 5, 1949 that pledged a free and impartial plebiscite. Details in the following report.
As occupied Jammu and Kashmir bleeds under New Delhi's annexation, Kashmiris on both sides of the line of control and across the world mark the Right to Self-Determination Day under tyranny, misery, and ethnic cleansing. 72 years ago on this day in 1949, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution guaranteeing the Kashmiris their inalienable right to self-determination. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi has reaffirmed commitment to the just cause of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. In a series of tweets, Prime Minister Imran Khan has renewed the country's pledge to stand unequivocally with the Kashmiri people in their struggle for freedom. Imran Khan said Pakistan stands unequivocally with the Kashmiris in their struggle for freedom. Khan slammed the Indian tyranny in Kashmir, calling it one of the most ruthless, inhumane, and illegal occupations in modern history. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the world has rejected India's attempts to alter the disputed status of the occupied valley. Meanwhile, the Kashmiri leaders have slammed the United Nations and global leaders for their criminal silence amid the increasing Indian atrocities in the valley. They say the people of Kashmir await the fulfillment of the United Nations pledge for a lasting and peaceful resolution to the Kashmir dispute. Since Kashmir's annexation on the 5th of August in 2019, New Delhi's unprecedented and unabated oppression has claimed hundreds of lives under its inhumane military siege. Despite COVID-19 pandemic, India has deprived Kashmiris of their basic right to life, health, and food.
For more on this, we are joined by Gohar Gilani, a renowned Kashmiri journalist from Srinagar. Sir, thank you for joining us. Sir, Kashmiris across the world are observing the Right to Self-Determination Day today, while Pakistan has pledged its support to the Kashmiri people. How can the world play its role in curbing Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir?
See, at a time when the demand from the Kashmir Valley and from the families who are losing their young ones is that the government should return their bodies. I mean, when the questions are about existence and survival, these solidarity campaigns are important, but at the same time, the challenges in Kashmir are very different. These are about identity, these are about existence, these are about demography, and these are about, like, people are not saying don't kill us, but they are saying please return the bodies. The situation is that bad.
Sir, Pakistan has been raising Kashmir's voice at all the international forums. How Kashmiris see Islamabad's efforts for highlighting Kashmir issue?
I think UN has already published a couple of reports on Kashmir, but the situation on the ground does not seem to be changing. On the other hand, the situation on the ground is getting worse by the day, and there's a lot of challenge that people are facing on every single front, and they are saying that when it's about their existence, and this existence challenge, according to key Kashmir watchers, is the biggest ever existence challenge that Kashmir has faced for many decades, many centuries, in fact.
Mr. Gohar Gilani, thank you for talking to Indus News. And now moving on to India, protesting farmers have blamed the Narendra Modi government's ego problems for the deadlock. This comes after the 7th round of talks between the government and farmers ended inconclusively. A union leader says they will only discuss the minimum support price and repeal of laws. Both sides have agreed to meet again on Friday. Thousands of farmers have been camping at Delhi border since late November against reforms they say favor big corporates. 3 farmers have committed suicide in the protests. South Korea says it is making diplomatic efforts to secure the release of its tanker seized by Iran. Yesterday, Iran's Revolutionary Guard seized a South Korean flagged tanker in Gulf waters, detaining its crew. Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa said the ministry was talking to diplomats in Tehran and Seoul. Meanwhile, officials say Seoul is reviewing whether a senior diplomat would be visiting Tehran on Sunday as planned. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh termed the incident a purely technical matter. Iranian state media quoted Khatibzadeh as saying the ship was taken to shore for polluting the sea. This follows tensions over the freezing of Iranian's fund worth $7 billion in South Korean banks due to the U.S. sanctions. Iran has rejected Israeli accusations of seeking to manufacture nuclear weapons by enriching uranium up to 20%. Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said a regime with nuclear weapons cannot level accusations at Tehran. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department said Iran's decision to enrich uranium is a clear attempt to increase its campaign of nuclear extortion. It said Iran's attempts to manufacture nuclear weapons will continue to fail. The European Union has also warned that Iran's plans will have serious nuclear non-proliferation implications. Meanwhile, China has urged all parties to practice restraint and avoid taking steps that may worsen tensions. Israeli security forces killed 27 Palestinians in extrajudicial killings in 2020. Israeli rights group BT Selam says the list includes a person with autism and 7 minors. The group says in at least 11 of the 16 killings investigated in the occupied West Bank, the Palestinians posed no threat. It says Israel has been implementing a reckless, unlawful open-fire policy in the West Bank for years, which is fully backed by the government, the military, and the courts in utter indifference to the predictable lethal results. The group says Israeli forces also destroyed more than 700 Palestinian buildings, including homes. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden and outgoing President Donald Trump have held rallies in Georgia ahead of Senate runoffs today. Georgia's Senate runoff election will determine which party controls the 100-member upper house of the country. Details in the following report. With the U.S. bracing for a change in White House, the state of Georgia is set to determine the reins of the power corridors in Washington. The act of the U.S. Senate can only be undone through a presidential veto. President-elect Joe Biden hit the campaign trail in the battleground state, urging Georgians to vote for Democrats. Speaking in Atlanta, Biden said the election's result could chart the course, not just for the 4 years, but for the next generation. He said voters in Georgia had the power to change America.
I know this campaign has been exhausting. You put the hard work in over the last few years to get to this moment. It's been intense. It's been nonstop. But I'm asking you to give everything you've got one more day. One more day. And that one more day, this is not hyperbole. You can change America.
On the other hand, President Donald Trump also claimed potential victory for Republicans in the runoffs. Rallying in Dalton, Trump warned that the Georgia runoff is the last line of defense against Democratic control of the Senate. If Republicans win one or both the seats in today's runoffs, they will retain their control over the Senate.
Watch what happens over the next couple of weeks. You watch what's going to come out. Watch what's going to be revealed. You watch. And I have to tell you that the stakes of this election could not be higher.
If Democrats win both the seats, the 100-member chamber will split 50-50, extending the tie-breaking vote to Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, Georgia's top election official, Brad Raffensperger, debunked Trump's accusations of widespread voter fraud. The United Kingdom has announced its third national lockdown as a new strand of COVID-19 takes the country by storm. The lockdown, likely to last till mid-February, was imposed after over 50,000 cases were detected for 3 straight days. Globally, there are more than 1.8 million fatalities and 85 million infections. Details in the following report.
As the hopes of massive coronavirus vaccination drives across the globe by the end of 2020 sputtered out, the world faces staggering new challenges. 8 Canadian politicians resigned or demoted after traveling internationally over Christmas holidays despite advisories to avoid non-essential trips. In the U.S., the virus is pushing the country's socio-economic infrastructure to the brink. One American is dying every 33 seconds as the vaccine rollout hits snags, with more than two-thirds of the 15 million doses shipped within the U.S. going unused. Meanwhile, in California, the rate of infections is at its highest as ambulance crews are told not to transport patients unless they have significant chances of survival.
Take a look more, I think, closely at that 7-day average, 336 lives lost, families torn apart because of this pandemic. Just put it in perspective, the last 14 days, close to 4,000 Californians have lost their lives. This is a deadly disease. This is a deadly pandemic. It remains more deadly today at any point in the history of this pandemic.
In Ireland, hospitals are failing to manage the fast-growing outbreak as cases surpass those recorded in the first wave. The French government says a group of 30 citizens will be selected at random to represent the concerns of the public and advise the government's vaccination strategy. Meanwhile, PM Boris Johnson announced blanket curbs lasting over 5 weeks in England and warned the weeks ahead will be the hardest yet.
As I speak to you tonight, our hospitals are under more pressure from COVID than at any time since the start of the pandemic. In England alone, the number of COVID patients in hospitals has increased by nearly a third in the last week to almost 27,000. And that number is 40% higher than the first peak in April.
In Germany, the health ministry is mulling delaying second doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to make scarce supplies go further. However, manufacturers warn they have no evidence their drug will continue to work if the booster shot was given later than tested in trials. Over in Oceania, officials have warned that the outbreak in Australia's largest city, Sydney, may have spread to 3 adjacent cities.
Now moving on to Pakistan, 59 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. This takes the country's death toll to over 10,409. Health officials reported 1,947 new infections overnight. Meanwhile, more than 35,000 active COVID-19 cases have been detected in the country. The health ministry says out of over 490,000 countrywide cases, more than 444,000 people have recovered. The ministry said over 219,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported nearly 141,000 cases. Sudan says it will not take part in direct talks with Egypt and Ethiopia over Addis Ababa's dam on River Nile. In a statement, Sudan's Water Resources and Irrigation Ministry said Khartoum wants talks mediated by the African Union. Khartoum said it received an invitation for a direct tripartite meeting instead of response to Sudan's request for a trilateral meeting with AU experts and observers. It demanded that all future talks must proceed with the bloc's mediation. Earlier, South Africa, in its capacity as chair of the AU, announced the resumption of talks between the three parties after a month. Australia and Mexico have offered asylum to WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange. In an interview, Prime Minister Scott Morrison said if the appeal fails, Assange can return to Australia. The Aussie PM said the case in a British court where Canberra is not a party, but he can offer Assange consular support. Meanwhile, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has also offered political asylum to Assange. Obrador said he wanted his foreign minister to ask London if they can release Assange so Mexico could offer him refuge. Earlier, a UK court denied a US request to extradite Assange, citing mental health concerns. In India, wildfire authorities in the central Mandsaur city found crows with symptoms of bird flu after carcasses of birds were reported in the area. In western Junagadh city, around 53 carcasses of birds, including herons and ducks, were found. The reason for their death is yet to be ascertained, but laboratory examination confirmed the presence of bird flu. Now moving on to Palestine, a young girl with a spinal tumor turned to horse riding to improve her posture. But it did more than that and helped her regain some sensation in her legs. Find out more in the following report.
12-year-old Layan in Palestine opted for horse riding sessions after a spinal tumor diagnosis. The sessions also helped gain some sensation in her limbs that had been affected by the tumor.
When I first started riding the horse, I did not have feeling in my legs. I used to be afraid while riding. Afterwards, and thank God, I started regaining sensation in my legs. So I started to know how to ride and perform other exercises.
Layan's father says after her chemotherapy in 2017, they tried aquatic and physiotherapy, but nothing alleviated her pain. According to Layan's instructor Al-Natche, a single brush with horse riding started to show improvement in her legs.
When she started, she had immense suppleness in her back and could not hold it straight. The way she is sitting now was not apparent then. She used to have a loss of balance. Currently, she can do her exercises. Her father and I used to help her, one from each side. Today, she can do it on her own. Do the back exercises, Layan.
Al-Natche claims that horseback riding has many therapeutic benefits, especially for children with autism and other disabilities. He says it is safe since horses are very sensitive to their riders and will act accordingly.
And now moving on to the business stories, OPEC Plus will resume talks today amid a deadlock over February's oil output levels. The unusual decision to put negotiations into a second day was taken after a 3-hour debate in a virtual meeting. Saudi Arabia argued against pumping more oil due to new lockdowns. Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdul Aziz bin Salman said markets are still fragile and the new variant of coronavirus is unpredictable, while Russia led calls for higher production, citing recovering demand. Earlier, OPEC Secretary General Mohammed Barkindo warned member states of downside risks facing the oil market. Most European stocks are trading lower as coronavirus cases rise in the region amid fresh challenges to mass vaccinations. The Pan-European Stock 600 has slipped just under the flat line. Frankfurt's DAX and the CAC 40 in Paris have also slid fractionally. Italy's FTSE MIB2 has dropped marginally. However, London's FTSE has edged up despite a third nationwide lockdown. Earlier, Asian stocks traded mixed, with Chinese telecom stocks surging after the New York Stock Exchange announced it will no longer delist the firms. In Italy, heavy snowfall continued to hit the northern Alpine region after a weekend of extreme weather. It left some residential areas completely snowed in. The Alpine Adriatic Meteorological Society says more than 6 feet of snow fell in the mountainous area of Camlico, close to Austria. A video showed snow blocking the entrances to homes and buildings. As it continued to fall in the small village of Zapata in the region of Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, firefighters, civil protection units and alpine rescue teams worked to clear the snow. More snowfall is expected to continue in the region in the coming days. And now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.